Oh, man.
Okay, so welcome to our third episode of Westworld, Season 2, Episode 3. We're going to talk about Virtu in Fortuna. Fortuna?
Virtu e Fortuna.
Virtu Fortuna.
I could be completely wrong with how I just
See,
said that.
I don't know if that's, I think
We're
that's Latin.
uncultured swines!
We're likely completely and utterly wrong.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
Okay,
We're uncultured!
Let's just move on. So this is going to be our third episode. We're joined here by your guest, Brian.
I'm Kalani.
And I'm Calvin.
And we're going to talk in depth about this episode. And let's just get going.
If we're going to be talking in depth in this episode. This episode's going to get really long.
This episode can get really long.
Today's sponsor is... I'm just kidding.
Sponsored by. Anyways. So what's everybody's, like, big impressions about this episode? What did y'all feel about this episode? Once the credits roll.
I found this episode very confusing. And in many ways, just in the sense that another world was introduced.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot more different parts of the story being told, and we don't really know where they lie. Because the one thing that really confused me specifically was the Bengal tiger thing, where her name is Grace, right?
Yeah. So in the episode, I don't think she's ever named, but I think according to IMDb, her name is Grace.
Right. And so in episode 1, we see, I think it's episode 1, it's either episode 1 or 2, we see the Bengal tiger on the shores.
Or even in the trailers, it was on
the shore, so that kind of alluded to the fact that the parks are being connected.
Right.
And then we see in this episode how the tiger gets there in the first place, with her running away from it, and then the tiger crossing the border.
The tiger actually breaking containment.
Right.
Yeah. So I did enjoy that cold opening of, like, this is Rajworld, and, like, we get that audio cue of Seven Nation Army in the background played by Sitar, and
the music was
the music is really good. It was objectively really good. I like how they utilize the soundtrack from Westworld and played on different instruments just to convey that it's in a different place. What do you think about the introduction of Grace and our mystery man?
It was hot. No.
I could see the appeal. I could
watch it again now. I found it...
Apparently, Kalani wanted to see more.
I want to see more. No, I'm just kidding. I find it really, really cool that it's kind of interesting in a way that, like, a thing that they kind of did was, like, her holding the gun up to the guy and being like, alright, let me just shoot you to see if you're a host or not, and if you're programmed to actually like me, boom! I guess you're not, alright, let's go fuck!
Oh man, for that first scene, it raised so many questions about just like how the firearms in Westworld works.
Oh,
we were talking about it like pre-podcast or pre-review here, that we're still kind of confused about how guns work in this kind of like world. You know what I mean?
It makes it much more confusing just because when she's holding the gun, which theoretically all the firearms are made the exact same way if they're being produced by Delos and Westworld, the company, and she shoots the guy, but he comes out of it just fine.
Yeah.
Right.
But when the host shoots him...
Yeah. And it seems like the firearms in Westworld, Rajworld, they seem to be only firing probably paintballs or BBs or something, concerning
like high tech, like
it's
paintballs.
enough
looking at the wound that the guy has.
It's enough to bruise.
But not enough to kill.
Right.
Yeah. I would like to think that our confusion lies in timeline, like where to place the events in Rajworld in like the proper timeline of Westworld. What I was thinking way before we did our first episode was that this was pre-Ford's death. So pre-Ford's death scene.
Yeah, that makes sense, because in the time between we see Grace and Mystery Man like getting down, there is a time skip between them and like that first scene and them already on the elephant.
And assuming that they're reaching the edge of the park, and these parks are freaking massive, like there is a considerable amount of time that has to pass through.
I think this also kind of gets really confusing also in the sense that, like, when they're riding the elephant and they end up in the tent, right?
Right.
And they open it up, and she knows those two people that are killed in there were people who were actually real.
I wish he should, like, said something faster, because the guy could have been still
in the show.
He could have been still in the show.
We could have had
and we could have gone...
hot, steamy, sexy.
Got more...
This isn't Game of Thrones.
We could have got more...
No, Game of Thrones is dragons, okay? This is about... different worlds and people.
We could have got more British abs. Just saying.
But the
British
girl...
or Scottish abs. I'm just saying. And I'm also equal opportunity nudity here. Let's be fair here.
More booty is good for me.
More booty, more everything. Anyways, so I think what this scene at least establishes is that there's other worlds that is going through the same issues. And these, let's say, creatures or like these hosts are leaving their containment. And that could lead to a detail that I'll talk about towards the end of this episode about how different worlds are colliding at this point. You know what I mean?
Well, then, wouldn't there be a thing to point out would then be, because you said you think that whatever happened is pre-Ford death, right?
Yeah.
So what if that whole interaction between her and him is right on the cusp of the revolution?
Oh, like
Yeah.
Right?
like
so
the update.
yeah, so because before the news narrative goes in, right? Like, it should be that only guests can kill hosts.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it, right? So, theoretically speaking, if it was just right on the cusp of the revolution with the guests and the hosts and all of that,
Right.
then it would kind of make sense in the narrative standpoint where it was like, oh yeah, she shot him and he lived through it. But then in the other part where they're walking through it, he got shot and we actually don't know if he died, by the way.
Yeah.
But theoretically, it's assumed that he died. Theoretically,
I'm
assumed
laughing
that he
right now.
died. So, it could just be that the way that everything in Rajworld that happened was right on the edge of Ford dying and the new narrative kicking in.
Right.
And then that would make more sense.
I like how we came in kind of confused about this, and we talked it out, and we get a little bit, but slowly and surely we're piecing it together. I do like the idea that yes, this is pre-Ford. This is all the events leading up to kind of the revolution itself. You know what I mean?
Right.
So.
And then you kind of have to remember also, like, the thing that I thought about now that would kind of make more sense is, like, because they're all, like, hosts, right? So their decay rate would be a little bit different. Because it wouldn't be, like, you know, dead body, okay, body's rotting, like, you know, how it was in that church.
Yeah.
Where you walk back and you see all the bodies are starting to rot, and you see you see Ford lying there, and he's starting to decompose, right?
Maggots are eating his...
Right, versus the Bengal tiger, which looks relatively the same, maybe with the exception of, like, a couple of, like, it looks a little bit dirtier, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, later we see Grace come out of the water, and she's greeted by the Ghost Nation. And assuming it's gonna follow the timeline, this is when Ghost Nation, before Delores slaughters them, essentially. Right. So, who knows? This whole thing with timelines and everything, like, it is still a mystery, yes, that we're a holdover from previous episodes. We're gonna talk about where do these events fit in, like, the huge narrative of this show. Yeah. What do you think Grace is there for, by the way? There's a lot of close-up shots of a notebook, and there's a lot of, like, things there. There's some underlying mystery there.
There's a theory that Grace is probably actually Logan's daughter. And actually the man that she was talking to earlier, like in the very beginning, out in the garden, was potentially Logan himself. Because you do see that he is kind of like an older man.
Oh, I need to go back and see that.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
And, like, the theory is that, you know, considering all the things that have happened to him, that what he wants to do to Westworld, and as well as the rest of the parks, is he actually wants to kind of, like, take them down, like, from the inside. So then you see on her notebook that emblem, like the double hexagon.
Hexagon.
Like the helix.
You want to put it up on the TV so we could always, like, refer back to it?
I mean, yeah. So, you see that same icon, the same logo on, in, the first episode?
The very first episode when Hale goes down to the sub-level with the drone host.
On the computer, yeah. So then, it's kind of like an idea that they are probably an outside company, not related to Delos, not related to Westworld, that are basically trying to take Westworld down for some reason or another. It seems unclear at the moment.
I would want to see it's probably like a subsidiary of Delos, probably. That Logan still has some form of control or influence in this company to have this sort of control. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That maybe Charlotte is part of, because we only see that logo whenever Charlotte's around.
Yeah.
Or whenever anything related to Charlotte and Abernathy.
Yes.
Yeah, we only see
We
that
actually
whenever that.
do see that logo again when Bernard is decrypting basically the
Abernathy,
yeah.
later in the episode.
Yes.
But I mean, I think that creates a connection between all of those characters, right?
Mhm.
Because now we know that whatever Abernathy has in his system
Right.
is related to that company that both, I believe,
Yeah.
Grace and Charlotte work for.
So yeah, that's what we saw. It's just like that logo and everything else there. So yeah, this just means that there's a through line between these characters saying that they are one way or another connected. But this is another question. Stubbs is probably the only sole survivor of the security team of Westworld. Where does his allegiance lie?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
I find his situation a bit odd, just because the last that we saw of him in season 1 was that he was with Ghost Nation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he just came out of there fine.
Was
Like,
it sup?
sup, bitches,
Yeah.
I'm here. No, but there's no justification for him coming back yet.
There's no explanation that's even known at the moment. Oops.
And also at this very moment, he doesn't really give anything to the narrative at this point in time. He's just kind of like
He's just a
background,
bystander.
Yeah, backdressing right
Yeah.
now. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on in like the Westworld community right now. Just like, oh, Stubbs is a double agent with somebody else. He's
Yes,
working in
there-
cahoots with someone.
There was a leak before Westworld even premiered
Right.
that states that, like, Stubbs might be some kind of double agent.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure whether that means he's some kind of host or whether he's working for, like, an outside company or Charlotte or whoever Grace is that might be working for, like that double helix company.
Right.
So we still, like, know little to nothing about Stubbs' true intent.
Right.
And he still is showing up in these episodes. That means he has to be significant, not just, the sole survivor of the security team.
So, moving on to the next scene. So, we see Bernard going back into the, to kind of like the control area. So, like the sub-basements of Westworld. And we find that Hale is alive in this 12 days later timeline.
Yeah.
And she knows something.
Mhm.
She knows something. So, I think maybe either next episode, my quick predictions, we're going to get into bigger predictions at the end of this episode. My small prediction is that she knows Bernard is a host, not a horse.
Something has to have
Host.
happened.
Yes.
Something has to happen for Charlotte to have this kind of reaction where she's like being catty or something like that. Just being like very, oh hey, I didn't even think you were going to be alive. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You know what I mean?
But
Yeah.
I think the only thing that makes it kind of like interesting about the narrative right now is that where Bernard is in like the middle of the story versus the 12 days later story is that him and Charlotte have split up.
Yeah, well, that's what we learned right after the whole Revis and the when they first figure out Peter Abernathy.
Yes.
So, I like how I can't take Stephen Ogg in a very like, let me save all of you.
I am a gentleman. Let me guide you to your way.
Let me protect you. But that's probably this is the whole typecasting conversation there.
Yeah.
But what we in that next scene after that, we flash back to see Bernard and Charlotte tracking down Peter Abernathy and the events leading up to potentially their current situation. So, what do you guys think about this episode? We know at least now that if you are with someone that's like with behavior, and they could still manipulate the host. So, yeah.
Well, assuming they have like that little tablet.
Yeah, tablet and like make a small incision there.
Yeah.
I think then the people who should be in power in terms of, or at least highest ranked or highly sought, is going to be the programmers. So like Felix, Sylvester, any of the workers like that.
Well,
Or
probably not Felix or Sylvester because remember, like they just like kind of repair
their body shop.
I
Their
know,
body
but the
shop.
reason-
Felix just kind of is just like a hobbyist.
But then they
programmer.
understand how it works.
Yeah.
And Felix knows specifically, I think, how to... Is it Felix? Yeah, it's Felix.
Yeah, Felix.
He knows how to bring back, like, the birds. We saw him have an interest in
Yeah.
that. And we saw him... Anybody with that tablet
Right.
is going to be the ones that should be highly sought out for.
Right.
And then on the same ranking as that would then be Meave.
Mm-hmm.
So Meave, Felix, Sylvester, just because they're body shop technicians and have the tablets with them general. Well, actually, no, we haven't seen them with the tablets, but they know how to work it.
Mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
And anybody of that sort
Yeah.
should be the ones that have power. So Bernard's there too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then we do have Sizemore with Meave. Like he's worked on narrative before, and he knows how to use the behavior technology.
I think
programming as well.
I think after this episode, I'm more team Meave and Sizemore's storyline.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
we
think
see
I'm
them
more-
conflict, right?
We see kind of like the conflict, what they're trying to get through and stuff like that. The storyline, I wouldn't say that I don't care for Delores' storyline, but also like, I guess it's just jarring that she's like just killing a bunch of people now.
Mm.
And last season she was like, "Oh, I'm the farm girl" and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I can't empathize with you, or it's like now you have become the antagonist.
Yeah.
And as an audience member, it's just like, I guess for me, I'm just trying to root for the good guy, and I guess Maeve is now the good guy.
I think,
or she has the best intentions
yeah,
of like
because
just searching for a daughter.
especially with like we were talking about it last episode about how Delores potentially has some kind of god complex because
Yeah.
she's kind of like assumingly the first one to kind of discover consciousness and also one of the oldest hosts in the park,
Yeah,
along with Angela and Clementine, which are on her team, so to speak.
that's kind of like the whole Adam and Eve conversation.
Mhm.
Then you know, it's
Yeah.
just like she's got the forbidden fruit, and now she's like giving it to all the hosts and stuff now.
But I feel
Yeah.
like among all the people, Maeve probably has the most power among all of them.
Yes.
Because keep in mind, she has one person who's a higher up in Westworld, so that's Lee Sizemore,
Mhm.
even though he's kind of a
Yeah.
she also has Felix and Sylvester, who are body shop people, so she has people from 2 levels of Westworld.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Plus, she herself can control
Yes.
robots
And
or
control
like.
them
Well,
mostly remotely as well.
Not really, though.
But I mean, now, as
we
we're
saw,
seeing-
we
now
saw
as we
that
see,
she
we were
doesn't
gonna-
have as much
Yeah.
control as she thought.
So in the next scene, Maeve and Sizemore are making their way to the homestead store narrative, I suppose, and they're trying to track down their daughter until we see members of Ghost Nation, and they get would the proper thing be ambush? No, not really. Just kind of met them.
Yeah.
I think
on the
they see
stream.
Hector talk to them, and then they say like, "Oh, you can be on your way, but we want Lee."
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you
Which is
guys' opinions on
interesting.
that? Yeah.
That's something that I didn't.
So I wrote down in my notes here that Ghost Nation's the hosts have been reprogrammed, and then Elsie is controlling them, and this equals Elsie is alive.
Oh, so you
Yeah.
think?
So my thinking of that is that because Stubbs got ambushed by Ghost Nation in the previous episode, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Elsie gets
We don't-
killed on
we-
quotations.
We don't know what happened.
Yeah,
to
we don't
Elsie.
know
that
what
was
happened.
A long time
That was a long time ago. But what if the Ghost Nation folks, either they were reprogrammed or maybe they're kind of like a last resort, like, hey, like, we'll help you, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And also, this might be a funny, like, real life thing. It's just kind of like, oh, you know, like, white savior mentality. Like, now it's all a bunch of Native Americans being the saviors now. You know what I mean? So
That'd be pretty cool.
that would at least explain why Stubbs is alive in the second season. It fills in that plot hole of like, hey, why is he alive out of nowhere?
Yeah.
I want to think maybe people who are Ghost Nation hosts are trying to protect the guests
Mm.
and people who are fleeing the gallery. I just want to see if there's like some kind of village and a bunch of people like in a bunch of like formal wear just kind of like hanging out and waiting for people to save them. You know what I mean?
That'd be pretty cool.
That'd be kind of interesting there.
Definitely.
Yeah, because we do see earlier in the episode about with Grace kind of being caught by
Mhm.
the Ghost Nation, and there's this commentary in this Reddit post that basically
We should put a link to that, by the way.
puts the subtitle over it. It's like, why? Basically, it's like, why can we assume that she's going to die just because she, bumps into these Ghost Nation?
I guess the original thought is that like the Ghost Nation member has a knife drawn out, so there's an inherent assumption of like soldiers versus Indians, or like cowboys versus Indians, so the situation. Yeah, in that photo, they have knives, and he has his knife drawn out. Yeah. So I guess as an audience member, you're led to assume it's like, oh, they're just gonna scalp her. Yeah, you know what I mean. But I would like the thematic shift where it's like, oh, they're not there to kill her. They're there to rescue her. You know what I mean?
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. And of course, Westworld is not a stranger to misdirection.
That's a good point. Sure. Yeah, they're not a stranger to misdirection. Oh, would that be a misdirection? Like Ghost Nation actually there helping people?
Mm-hmm. That'd be a good really complete misdirection, considering that we don't know, they don't speak English, so we don't know what they're saying, and we also have not really seen much about them.
Actually, that would make a lot of sense if you think about it, because then that would make
in the first episode of this season, we also see Delores hunting down Ghost Nation members.
Right, and then on top of that would explain the Ghost Nation's interest with Lee.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're making these connections now of
so it could purposefully be misdirect.
I want to see Elsie in the next episode. I want to see the reveal where it's turns out Grace is being led to their camp, and in their housing, whatever the housing they choose, it's you go in, it's like, Elsie, she's alive.
Oh, she's a god.
And you just see Elsie, she's just there with her tablet, just kind of controlling everything, coordinating.
You know how hosts comes up with a narrative, or things oh, that's part of their religion. Imagine Elsie becomes a shaman character. It's let me show you.
I mean,
and then it's also let me heal you.
Oh yeah, let me heal you. Oh, that'd be a good idea. Yeah.
The more interesting thing would be also really fast. If Elsie is alive by this theory, then I want to go back and find that map and see where Elsie's location is. Because if she's in Ghost Nation, that would make it more interesting too, right?
Oh, the mid-season kind of
in that downtime when they had the map up with Elsie and it was pinging off. I want to see where she was.
Yeah, that'll be kind of interesting. So going down, so we get to the assault on the fort, the Alamo.
The Alamo.
Isn't it technically
It's a fort.
It's just a fort. It's not the Alamo.
No, we're calling it the Alamo because. Yeah,
I guess there's a visual context there.
Yeah.
So at this point of the story, Bernard gets taken with the Confederados and Abernathy to this fort. Delores gets to this fort and finds out that Peter Abernathy, her father, is there, and that
I think Abernathy comes in after. She's already kind of in the fort, and then the prisoners were brought in.
Abernathy is taken with them.
Were they? No, I thought...
no, because, that scene where the trees are... Mm-hmm. By the way, can I point out really fast? I found it really interesting that they dressed Abernathy in the very formal clothing.
Oh, the gala wear?
Yeah, so that kind of signifies that they were trying to sneak him out with the rest of the gala members who were there. Yeah. But of course, that didn't work out. Yeah. So, I think what happened was that he started spouting the things from his second narrative, the one I think that it has I think they said he was a big leader of a clan or something like that.
Well, Peter Abernathy, I guess in a previous narrative, he was a part of a cannibal horror narrative where he spouts out Shakespeare lines as he tries to devour his guests.
I shall have my revenges on you.
Exactly. So what's going on with Peter is that all the narratives are basically slot machining his way through his mind, and he's spouting out Shakespeare quotes, being the sheriff quotes, and all these different things, while there's this mysterious code that
supposedly taking up most of his
space, and glitching him out really crazy.
Do you feel like maybe the root cause of him slot machining through it is because the fact that file is so big that it's just kind of kicking out all of these other memories just to save space for that thing?
Bernard did say that there's there was, I believe the quote was a slim narrative or something, or basically it seems like Abernathy's running on some very basic bare bones programming that basically says go from point A to point B, and probably they're pulling random bits of code from various roles that he's played to kind of get that running. And then, you know, that's just kind of, they're just kind of bouncing off one another.
Well, he's a walking, talking hard drive, so I'm pretty sure, like, all this stuff that is suspect or, like, things that Hale wants to smuggle out of Westworld is just back in his mind, essentially.
Yeah.
No, like, all pun intended.
Yeah.
And everything that's trying to get him from point A to point B is, like, slot machining.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Delores has, she has her very Delores reaction. So she's bouncing back and forth with this whole Wyatt and Delores thing, and I don't know if you noticed this from the episode, but like she goes back and forth from those accents too. She tends to go back and forth. So like, I'm not gonna make that same question of like, is she conscious or not? Because clearly she's making decisions on her own, but still like she's always constantly switching from those accents. You know, it's almost like a split personality complex at this point. You know what I mean? She has this side of her that cares about her father, and there's this side of her that wants to just take revenge on people. So
I want to see where that plays out, but I do definitely want to see how this affects Teddy specifically. Because of how conflicting his nature should be. Like, on one end, he's supposed to love her and protect her.
But on the other end, this kind of like uber violence is like a put off, because he's always been this kind of like virtuistic kind of like person there, you know what I mean?
And Wyatt is definitely not virtuistic.
Well, we definitely do see that conflict later in the episode when Delores orders him to basically kill the rest of the Confederados. And we also notice that Delores has been watching silently, like in the background. I feel like Teddy is definitely very compassionate, very virtuistic, like in his base code kind of thing. But then you see him watching basically what's supposed to be the love of his life kind of like doing heinous acts and stuff. And it's just kind of like contradicting with his base code that he has to protect her, but then at the same time he wants to be, you know, like the good guy.
Can I just say that one scene where like Delores walks out like and like gets shot in her arm, gets shot in her side, that was so bad.
that was kind of badass. Yeah.
Just like walking, and she doesn't even fall or flinch or anything, she just keeps holding the gun out and keeps going.
That was very Terminator 2 situation right there. Yeah, she's like uber determined, and that's part of, I guess, her humanity, and I guess that's comes from our conversation earlier about consciousness. Like, consciousness is like, you know, you understanding your world, and I think it can be a combination of that understanding and then also that base human nature of like, we still have these familial connections with each other.
I think it also ties back to how like a big part of them reaching consciousness is their trauma. So for Delores, her trauma is probably the fact that in her narrative originally, she sees her father die. And then, like for Meave too, her narrative originally with the Homesteader is that she sees her daughter get killed
by the Ghost Nation.
Yeah. And then, ironically, Delores and Meave both have, like, the Man in Black standing in for those two characters. So he acts as both the Ghost Nation for Meave and the killers in Delores' narrative. But besides the point, I feel like it's a bit interesting to see how closely tied they are to their original narratives, just with how devoted Delores is to her father, and then going to Bernard and being like, I'm not forcing you to do this, but I want you to try to help me fix him. And then same thing with Meave, where it's like
she wants to just go find her daughter.
Her constant drive is to try to find her daughter at the edge of the park.
I think in that scene, I think I saw Delores at her most human. And less so as this I want to kill all humans situation. She reminded me as somebody that I've seen my past and I've seen him die multiple times. This is my only chance to right that wrong, you know what I mean? Or to make sure he's okay, you know what I mean? That goes into like a Doctor Strange conversation there, but yeah, like
wait for the Avengers one.
Wait for the Avengers. I forgot where I was going with this. Yeah, but later in the episode, just quickly moving on, we'll circle back if I remember anything. We'll circle back in the Mesa Hub. We find after Sizemore and Meave and Hector goes back underground, we find Felix and Sylvester. Well, we find Armistice and she
Which
has
leads
a dragon.
She does have a
She
dragon.
has a dragon!
that was very good.
So
part.
there's gonna be that's their way of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Thrones
New Daenerys Targaryen?
Yeah, modern Daenerys Targaryen.
modern Daenerys. Yeah.
And she has a snake tattoo up her. I'm like, that's lit.
Yeah.
I wonder. So technically, Wyatt's programming is in Delores, right?
Yes.
Armistice,
Or at least the name Wyatt is in,
is in her storyline, right?
Yeah.
Delores is not Wyatt. Well, Delores has Wyatt's like.
I think she
merit.
has personality traits that would have been attributed to Wyatt. But in Arnold uploading all of those files into Dolores.
Forge.
No, Arnold.
Well, that was the first time that Wyatt was in this thing,
Yeah,
right?
but I mean, in the sense that like when they were first writing it, Wyatt was supposed to be a second character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then up until the point where I think Arnold realizes, is it Arnold? Yeah, it's Arnold because it's
Yeah.
Bernardo.
Yeah. Bernardo.
So Arnold realizes that these robots can reach consciousness, and he says that it's not a good idea to open the park, which he brings up to Ford, and Ford is like, I think we should just keep going with it. We should just ignore that. To which then Arnold then programs some of the facets of Wyatt into Dolores, and then that's when the whole massacre at the church happens,
Yeah.
and then Arnold dies.
Donald dies. My through line argument is that Armistice is going to burn Dolores.
With the dragon!
With the dragon arm.
Yeah.
So we finally meet up with Felix and Sylvester. We have a very funny reunion with Sylvester. Well, probably not good for Sylvester because he has to like put his like chin to his chest because he had a grenade for who knows how long. And Felix just kind of
Just there.
He kind of looks traumatized. I don't know. He's still alive, and I think part of that is because of Armistice. Yeah. So we finally get those characters back, and now they're gonna head to see the wizard.
They're off to see the wizard.
So they're off to go find Maeve's daughter, and lo and behold, by the end of the episode, we find a samurai coming out for them.
Oh yeah.
The shot where Sizemore pulls the head out of the snow too.
Yeah.
That head's been there for a while, so
Robotic head?
yeah,
it's likely a robotic head.
yeah.
I like to point out though, before when we were talking about it when we were planning things out, you mentioned that Armistice's name is a very important factor, you feel like, in the eventual progression of her character.
Yeah,
right?
so there was there's something that
Because she
this
loses an
show.
arm.
That's what I
That's what everybody says, but no, like in my description, so a lot of names have varying degrees of kind of like meaning. So Dolores has meaning, Teddy Flood has meaning, so Bernard is an anagram for Arnold Weber.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For Armistice to have Armistice as her name, I don't feel that that's an accident. Like, I feel like maybe further down the line, maybe not this season or maybe the next season, maybe there's a call to cease arms, you know, like Armistice, you know what I mean? So, I don't know, what if somehow Armistice has kind of like this sway on Delores, Meave, and like kind of like the humans to stop the fighting, and like, let's figure this stuff out, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, like, names mean something in this series, so why not Armistice in her name?
I mean, if we think back to when the original hosts were being created, we see Armistice as one of the older characters as well, and she's just dancing in the background. Her image in there is completely different from how she ends up in season 2, or even in season 1 when she's like a gun-toting.
Like an antagonist.
Yeah, and we see her kind of crying in the church, which is a very different image to the
what we see today.
badass killer that we see in season 1 and season 2.
I mean, it could just be kind of like an ironic thing. Like, it seems that the names of the hosts kind of stick with them. At least like the sort of like the ones that stay in the park. Like Dolores has been Dolores throughout the entire span of her service life. Same thing with Meave. And I'm guessing we can assume probably Armistice as well. And you did say that she started out very kind of, I don't want to say meek, but yeah, she was kind of like very meek in the beginning, crying in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you see her like sort of kind of like being a badass. It's almost like a juxtaposition. Like her name, it means like some kind of like piece of like laying down arms, but then yet you see her in this episode toting a flamethrower.
Yeah.
Dragon.
And just like burning people alive.
Yeah.
I, by the way, really fast before if we move on, am very happy to see Clementine back.
Oh yeah.
But I
let's
am
not
very
forget that.
sad to see how she's.
She's just a shadow of her former self.
The actress that played her did so well when she first walks out, and it's interesting that you see her in a gown of white among all things.
Yeah.
And
Well, it goes back to your like, she's a shadow of herself. It's basically she's dressed in white. It's like it's
Almost
a ghostly
ghost-like,
image.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a ghost-like image of her former self.
And
you know?
as she's walking out, you see like if you pay attention to how
She's like kind of like
she's twitching, she's
Yeah,
very uptight,
yeah.
and she literally butts the butt of her gun into Bernard's head and knocks him out.
and it just drags him away just like unapologetically.
That was what she was doing with the other guy too. The poor worker who got his head dunked in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
in the
and later get killed in the fort scene.
yeah.
So let's move on to talk about the fort scene. So we in the previous episode, Delores is enlisting an army of Confederados. They go to the general's encampment at the fort, and next thing you know, Peter Abernathy's there. Charlotte Hale makes a task force to raid the fort. We had issues with this scene. Well,
aside from the technical issues.
there's different issues under the technical firearm spectrum. There's also narrative things where it's just like, was that worth it?
Yeah.
Though, was that scene to a certain extent earned? You know what I mean? Like the assault. Yeah,
It makes sense that they want like a full frontal assault to kind of distract from a smaller group, a smaller task force fire team coming through the back to retrieve Abernathy, which was their ultimate goal, seemingly.
right.
But like, would such a large force on the front really be necessary? And I mean, my only gripe with it was that it's very badly written in what they're doing, because it seems like the security guard have no care for their own life. You see them just like kind of
They're kind of like they're marching in like
like
old
like-
1800
yes.
soldiers, like in a bunch of blocks. I guess it's like a wild underestimating their enemy. I think that's probably the biggest case here.
It seems also kind of interesting because this is kind of like it seems like some sort of allusion to the Revolutionary War, because you have like American soldiers kind of like hunkered down in like their sort of guerrilla warfare tactics.
So you're saying this is like the Bunker Hill for
Yeah.
Westworld, like hosts?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It could also be
And
that
yeah.
it's so early on in the whole revolution that they could have just forgot
Yeah.
that actually is a thing now. It's like
People
real
dying.
People
can
die.
Yeah.
And you do see someone get shot in the chest, and like you
And
see them going down.
falling,
Yeah.
going down. Yeah, I just felt that it was so accelerated that it was a little jarring, because it's just like, oh, we're just having the scene now.
Yeah.
And I guess my comment was, oh, I thought this would be like a Game of Thrones situation where like, oh, this would be a dreaded episode 8 or 9, where it's just like,
It's
oh,
a huge
this
battle, and there's
like-
going to be huge consequences.
Yeah, when I saw that scene in the trailer, I was just like, oh, that's gonna be awesome. And it's like, oh, that's gonna be at like the towards the end of the
Yeah.
season, and there's gonna be like this big like fight, and it's like it's in episode 3, and I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
I guess we're not leading up to that. Then what are we leading up to then? You know what I mean?
And it also seems very strange how Delores just kind of like threw away her army of soldiers.
Yeah,
She
that
just-
was probably better.
Yeah, that was.
I feel like that makes sense from a narrative standpoint.
It does. It does give her like it does kind of progress her personality as sort of having like a god complex.
Right.
But I feel like it definitely was like a huge waste, and it doesn't just make any sense at the moment at this moment relating to like her ultimate goal or whatever.
I felt like I would have been more satisfied if it was like, oh, at the end, or like we had an extra episode to lead up to this one, because I felt it was very rushed. You know what I mean?
A little
Yeah.
bit.
And it felt like, oh, okay, you know, like I guess in my mind I was hyping that scene in a later episode, and I wasn't expecting it.
Mhm.
And then when I did see the episode, I was just like, oh, I guess I hyped it way too much then in my mind.
For me, it was watching that scene basically kind of showed how she really thought that a lot of people were just expendable.
Yeah, that was interesting.
She just tossed them aside, and then she said, she repeats this throughout the episode where she talks to the Confederados. She said, "I need you in order to survive." Something along the lines of that. And then, as she gets up there and she's talking to the guy that she previously killed in the Last Supper scene, she goes up to and talks to him as they're locking the doors and preventing all the Confederados from coming back into the place. They're like, "I told you, I needed you in order to survive." And then those people, in her eyes, are just, they can just get tossed to the side.
Tossed to the side.
Right. And so, the scene that I really kind of thought showed that too was as they're locking the door, the people that are under Delores, or I guess you can say they're under Angela.
Yeah, the hooded.
They start walking back and they pull their guns towards the door and shoot towards the Confederados that are cramming through the door or trying to get back in, and they just kill and slaughter all of them.
Right.
And then as the episode closes out, you see them open up the doors again, and with the bayonets, they just start stabbing the people that are still alive.
Right.
And so I think that nails the whole line of some people don't deserve to make it to the valley beyond.
Oh, like what she's been saying throughout this whole thing. I thought this leads up to the whole Teddy situation where he's forced to essentially execute that Confederado commander.
I think he's like a colonel.
Yeah. That leads up to his sort of situation, or at least his kind of like, do I do this or do I not do this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that questioning of like, I do like Delores, but at the same time, this is like senseless violence to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And from what I get with your conversation about the whole Valley Beyond is that the Valley Beyond is basically you're either in it with me or without me.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So she's killing people that are disobeying her orders, essentially.
Right, and you can argue that Teddy literally does not make it to the Valley Beyond because he
we
dies in the lake
in the first episode.
Right, and so he's in a valley technically, and he doesn't make it beyond the valley because he's in the water.
A previous valley, and this might make sense in the first season where there's a Ghost Nation person that gets killed, because if my inkling is correct that Ghost Nation are basically helping humans, they're not going to be for Delores.
Yeah.
You know, so that's going to be something that I hope we see at the end of this season, or, you know, in some way, shape, or form at the end of this season.
I want to see because that's one instance of the Ghost Nation being interested in someone that's not
a host.
Yeah. I want to see more examples of it to see if it confirms the theory that the Ghost Nation are actually looking for survivors.
I mean, we do see there are two instances in this episode. There is that one with Sizemore and Grace at the very end of the episode.
At this point, do you want to go into predictions for the next episode? We at this point of the recording, I don't know how this release window is. We've gotten caught up with all of the episodes.
Yes.
Which is 3 at this point.
So we're gonna probably, go with probably predictions. There's one thing there that I see on that screen right now is the tablet with Abernathy's
Abernathy's encryption being held by Bernard. This is a theory that's definitely, this is a scene that's very struck out with me, mainly because I've had to work in basically encrypting drives and stuff as part of my job. And what interests me is that he's using a one-time use key. Now, normally those aren't, like encryption, you would have a typically reusable key that basically decodes the entire program file. But then this is a one-time use key, meaning that, and I've also read some theories on this, that this potentially is Bernard kind of uploading or downloading the data from Abernathy into like his own sort of like brain or like his own storage
self,
unit. And then that either he's already wiped the information from Abernathy, or it's going to be deleted somehow. Because the only way, like, this seems like information that Charlotte Hale really wants, or like Delos really wants, and that this also
Or was it even
leads,
Delos?
Yeah,
to be honest, yeah.
But it also leads to the theory that basically present day at the beach with Bernard and basically like the offshore security team.
Yeah,
and whatever.
scary bald dude.
Yeah, scary bald dude. That they're basically going through this loop over and over and over to get this one-time use key to basically unlock the encryption that's on the data from Abernathy.
So we were like matrixing this kind of like prediction here.
Yes.
So like what we see in this season is basically like a recollection. I think we mentioned this before,
Yes.
and not on the podcast, but
we've talked about this before.
Yeah, that since Bernard is an unreliable narrator, that we're seeing everything from like maybe a computer screen or maybe
or it's like kind of parts of a timeline that are like it's assembled as if it were one single timeline, but different parts of it could be coming from like different loops, like they're trying to extract information.
That's why like kind of like the flickering of like his scenes.
But then this leads to the question, because Bernard has opened it now, would that mean that Abernathy is now useless?
That's a good point. Yeah. Well, okay, so it says on this screen, right? I don't know if he ever pressed yes or no. It says one-time use key, and it says yes or no.
I mean, the assumption is that he did, though. Because by the time that the guards are coming in, he's pulling... Which, by the way, I find very interesting that they pull Abernathy out, but they don't even look at Bernard.
No, that was like a point of contention when we were watching it. It was just like
anything to me. Yeah, that was very interesting. We do see like Bernard kind of like cowering in the corner as they extract Abernathy. That was... I
guess it was probably like in the chaos. Well, like a lot of people won't know like security and like watching your corners and all that stuff. Like, and most lay individuals will probably not know that. So,
but for someone that high power, for them to just ignore him, because
that's a good point. Yeah,
the discrepancy in it is so weird. Because think about it. In the first episode, right, they find him on the beach,
and they have those cards,
and they're guiding him throughout the beach with all the security and stuff like that. But for them to just look at him, or not even give a look at him, and just go straight for Abernathy, would that then technically mean that Bernard is on a loop? Right? Because Delores almost did the same thing last season, where she was walking through places and thinking that she was with William, and then it turns out she's just there by herself.
Yeah.
Turns out this is Westworld's new experience, corporate world, where you're trying to smuggle data
espionage world.
Corporate espionage world, where you're trying to smuggle information out of a Westworld park.
But I do find it very interesting that they don't look at him, like they don't give him a glance.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Yeah, you did brought up a good point about that, because if he was that important to Westworld, wouldn't he also been taken with him? You know what I mean? Yeah. I think you're also right. I think we might have found a plot hole.
Yeah, that could be. But then, like, the explanation also could be that that Charlotte Hale's kind of like leading this assault. So then she could place more priority over Abernathy than Bernard. And there was that line earlier in the episode where she's like, "Oh, like you actually got out of that," kind of like referencing that she knows that Bernard was kind of like stuck in that shithole, like stuck in that mess that just kind of.
My prediction was she at this point, that 12-day timeline, she knows that Bernard's a host. Because she's very like not candid, but she's very catty.
Yeah,
like she's very like, oh, so you survived. Yeah. Oh, do you know what happened to Peter Abernathy? We seem to be losing him a lot.
Yeah,
and so I feel like she knows something far from what you're saying. Like, oh yeah, like did you survived that whole ordeal? Like far from that, I feel like she knows something more deep.
There is still no explanation as to why that card is red with Bernard's face on it.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about that in depth, but
the kill cards in the very first episode,
which turned out not to be kill cards. I don't know.
It could be recovery cards.
It could be recovery cards. Yeah.
But like that kind of this
the way that it's colored.
The way those are typically used, like back then, or like kill cards. It's like have you seen me, like kind of stuff, and like not in like the positive lost child kind of sense.
Yeah,
like, if you have more information about my whereabouts,
notify
authorities.
My connotation when I saw that scene in the very first episode of the season, I was really harking back to like the idea, like, you know, I guess early Afghanistan war, Iraq war. There was a bunch of these kill cards and like this notion that there are these high level people that we need to like take out.
Targets,
and I guess I was mixing the connotation of the color red as a way of like, oh, these are people that we need to kill.
Yeah.
Instead of like, my mind immediately went to that versus what you were saying. It's like, oh, these are recovery cards. You know
Honestly,
what I mean?
I just don't trust anything anymore because Westworld, if anything, watching Westworld has taught me not to trust them.
Yeah, there's a lot of misdirection.
To be fair, yeah, it is like either way. It could go from one way or the other. So either of us could be correct or wrong. It's just on the course of this next like 6 episodes, we're gonna figure it out. 7 episodes. My other are your computers almost dying? Do you use that? Do they use the same?
Yes.
One? Okay. My prediction for this next episode, we're not gonna see. I'm gonna say this out right now. No Shogun World next episode.
There's been a lot of theories that next episode will definitely be a more story about the Man in Black. I mean, in this episode, we see him going through Pariah with Lawrence, and then...
No, that was the last episode.
Was the last
Yeah.
episode? Oh, anyways.
I don't think there was any Man in Black in this episode.
Yeah, there was no
Well,
Man in
maybe
Black.
that's the reason why they want to bring him back, to give more backstory as to why the game is meant for him alone.
Yeah.
I think it might be a like back in time one. So like maybe we're circling back like episode 2 territory where we're like learning more about like how Logan got out. Oh, honestly, if the next episode was an all Logan episode of like how he got out of the park, how he's dealing with that trauma of William leaving him there, you know, like I would definitely watch that.
I feel like there might also be a little bit more like backfill on what happens to Grace after she gets captured seemingly by the ghost
I
station.
would want to see that, and I want to see Elsie.
Because that definitely seems like, since it was at the very end of the episode, it seems like something that's going to be like kind of
pivotal,
shown,
right?
At least in the very beginning of the next episode.
Yeah.
I feel like there also is going to be conflict between the characters of Logan and William, just because at the end of season 1, you know that they're not on good terms with each other.
Yeah.
And then leading into season 2, you see William in this really high-powered position where Logan should technically be, but Logan's at the bottom next to a pool shooting up some coke or something.
Yeah,
no, shooting up some future heroin.
Some future heroin, there you go. Yeah. But he's pretty down in the dumps right now compared to William, who's basically almost on his way of getting a really high-placed position.
If your theory is right, and the beginning of the episode was Logan's daughter, and that was Logan himself, and it was yours. But like, if that theory is correct, I want to see how Logan got clean, how Logan at this point, you know, becomes somebody where he can own a piece of the pie. Because at the end of that season, he's naked in the middle of Westworld.
Well, what do we know about the backstories behind William and Logan? So, William has a wife, and
who is Logan's sister.
And then at some point, his wife commits suicide.
Yeah.
Trigger warning, I'm sorry. Anyways, his wife commits suicide, and then his daughter grows up. Is it his daughter? His children grow up hating him and thinking
resenting, William is the reason why my mother committed suicide.
Right, and so for Logan, then it would be his father is currently trusting somebody else that's getting married into the family and not the head of the household, who should technically be him.
Yeah,
and then his sister is in love with the exact same guy who should be gaining power.
Hey, but props to old man Delos for not giving into nepotism.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Like, it was like, my son gets to do everything because he comes from my junk.
He comes from my junk. No, that puts Logan in a really bad place. So it would make an interesting, like, redemption arc in a way if his daughter is the one to kind of, like, redeem him in a way.
I would kind of like that story too. Where it's like Logan's daughter is the one to kind of like fulfill, like, maybe he wants to destroy Westworld, or maybe he wants to get a one-up on the Man in Black. You know what I mean?
But that's in the case that Grace, the girl in the Raj, is his daughter. Yeah. Because if she isn't, then we know nothing about her. Except for the fact that she likes sex.
I mean, come on, who doesn't?
Apparently, she likes sex and she likes danger. So in this case, she's into BDSM.
So she's into danger sex.
She's in the danger zone.
Here's the thing, though. When faced with real danger, though, I think she'll be kind of a survivor in a way because she booked it.
Yeah,
she left that guy there.
It's a reasonable assumption. You see someone get fucking shot, and you're like, I'm
run away.
Fuck the shit, I'm out. Bye, bitches.
Yeah, my flight only happens whenever there's certain people around. and if it's just by myself, I'm flying out of there.
But yeah, no, I think if there's anything that we've learned about that character is that she's definitely going to be one of the people that is very prevalent and very, like, she knows how to survive in her circumstances.
Mm-hmm. So in this case, next episode, my prediction, no Shogun World. Your prediction, more deep into Logan's backstory.
I think it's going to be Man in Black, like William's story. But in connection to that, it could be Logan's story as well, because both of them generally are tied in terms of story arcs. So.
And what's your prediction?
I think there's probably not going to be any more of Raj World or Shogun World just yet, but we will see a lot of those, the elements of both worlds kind of bleeding into Westworld.
Yeah.
Especially if it's going to focus on Grace.
We still,
her storyline.
We got a hint of that, in the beginning of the episode with the tiger, breaking those barriers. I'm also thinking, like, do those charges don't work anymore, by the way?
Which charges?
The charges that, like, supposedly blow up if the host, reaches the boundary.
Was that a thing?
Was it the boundaries of the world, or was it the leaving the island it explodes?
I feel like it might have been leaving.
Yeah,
leaving the island? Oh, okay.
Because it seems like if it's traveling between worlds, it would be more like a sort of programming thing. It's like you reach the edge, like some kind of program overrides something, and they just like turn around. Because they wouldn't want their resources to just like explode on them if it reaches the edge between two maps.
That would be kind of crazy if like you reach the edge of the map. Like it doesn't seem like I don't see before Westworld like the policy about it, like leaving the barriers, but it doesn't seem like humans get affected by it.
It could be like the thing where it's like when they hit the end of the park, they're just like, it doesn't seem like anything to me.
Yeah.
But quick thing to point out then, if that's the case of like if you take a host out of the world, you blow up, right?
Yeah.
None of them blew up when they were in the real world in the beginning.
So they were made for that.
I know,
I don't
but
think they were.
I'm just saying, if that's the case where in the beginning when they were taken out nothing happened, would that have to mean that something happened in between there where someone tried to escape and then they put the charges in as a precaution?
Can I circle back to something?
Yeah.
Well, you explaining that reminds me of Gus Fring's characters. A monologue about like... His whole monologue about how the elephant was trained to learn that this spike in the ground, they can't leave. You know what I mean? What if you apply that same thing to the charges? Mm-hmm. Like, in the beginning, you're told that if you can't leave because you have these charges in your head. You know what I mean? What if they just don't work anymore? Or what if it's just a red herring? It's like, maybe the host can leave. Yeah. But we're just telling the host they can't because of X.
But isn't Meave is the proof that it does, right? Because in season 1, she gets reconstructed because it's built reconstruction. They rebuild her and take the charge out of her spine.
Well, it could be there, but it could be just like, we say it's there. Also, sort of situation. You know what I mean?
But then, why would they go through the effort of rebuilding her?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right? So.
Okay, and something about Meave. Really quick one. Maeve's daughter gets kidnapped, and that's the only reason why they end up in Shogun World. I think maybe we don't get a hint of Shogun World this year. We don't get into the world, but maybe we get a narrative twist where her daughter gets kidnapped and she's in Shogun World. Yeah. So I think maybe there's going to be a setup. We have to have a reason why Meave is there. So maybe next episode is to set up. Anyways,
I think
what's going on.
I think an interesting thing what if it was like a big plot twist? Like, what if Maeve's daughter is decommissioned?
Or what if Sizemore is not telling the truth and he's saying that this is not my daughter, where's my daughter? It's like, I wasn't being completely honest with you, and the daughter's consciousness is in a different host in a different land.
It could be pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to prime your thing into like a high.
It could be. It's like a rebuild. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, so I think we're winding down right now on episode 3 of Westworld season 2 and our review and what's this discussion on this episode. So if you have any questions or have your own theories about Westworld, please like, subscribe, and have a very, very good conversation down the line. And I hope you're here for the next episode.